I mean, at its root, philosophy is simply the love of wisdom, right? That's what its name means, translated literally. So I really wanted students to begin to have a friendly relationship with philosophy. Schools only have authority over children because parents have delegated that authority to the school. It's the parents' job to educate and train up their children. And if they so desire to enlist the aid of schools, public or private, they may do so.
My guest today is Timothy Knotts. Tim is a founder of the New England Consortium of Classical Educators, a lawyer, and a curriculum developer for Classical Conversations. We met about a year and a half ago at the Spring 2024 CERC conference hosted by Thales College. Since then, Tim has had a book come out. That book is this one. Today, we'll be discussing Tim's new high school philosophy textbook entitled Reasoning Together Philosophy. Tim, welcome to the Optimistic Curmudgeon.
Thanks, Josh. It's good to see you.
Great to see you too. And I think you said your wife is currently teaching in the next room over. Is that right?
Yes, she is a violin teacher. So we have sounds of violin music through the house most days.
Excellent. Well, I can't think of anything better to accompany a discussion about philosophy than occasional strains of violin. And just maybe some of those student strains will be well-tuned violin notes. Who knows?
We hope so.
Indeed. Well, Tim, before we get into your book, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you have something of an interesting background. I don't know very many folks who kind of go law to homeschooling to teaching to writing philosophy textbooks. So walk us through some of your journey and all that.
Yeah, the long and winding road. I wanted to be a teacher at heart for a long time when I was young, and pursued some other things along the way. Found my way back to it in college with a degree in history and political science and education. Went to work in the public school system and found that really wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't matching my expectations at all. And saw there were a lot of problems at the public school system. Some of them were pedagogical, of course, and that's what I've come to appreciate more and more. But at the time, I noted there's a real legal issue, a problem of the school, the state, the family, all at play in how and who has the right to raise children. So I went to law school. Of course, why not, right? The next logical step. Because I wanted to understand that nexus better. I wanted to be able to explain to parents and schools where that line falls between the authority of the school and the authority of the parent. Frankly, later becoming a parent changed some of my personal views on that very issue, but I certainly gleaned a lot from my law school education. Some philosophical, some rhetorical, some just being a careful reader. And so after law school, I went to work as a lawyer. I was a litigator for a number of years, and eventually started homeschooling our children when we had them, and came across Classical Conversations, where my wife was invited to come visit community. A little later, I got invited to come and see and talk to a Challenge B class who was preparing for mock trial. Of course, valuable to have an attorney come talk to students about mock trial. And I said, well, can I see what else you do while I'm here? And they said, sure. So I stuck around and saw other activities that the class was doing in Challenge B. And I came home and said to my wife, yeah, this is what we want to do with our kids all the way through. And she kind of shrugged and said, yeah, I knew that. But that sort of launched me down the road of classical education. I recognized some things that were desirable for students, and looking back at my own education, seeing what was good that I knew that I had experienced that was reflected in this kind of education. So I started reading. I joined the CERC apprenticeship program and graduated a couple of years ago from that. And for the last several years, I've been a curriculum writer for Classical Conversations. So again, a long and winding road, but one that the Lord orchestrated. Certainly was not my plan from the beginning.
Well, and you're in the acknowledgments at the beginning of your book, you mentioned two friends of mine. One I know somewhat well, and I like Mark Hayes a lot. I don't know if we're really friends. We've met over the internet and in person once, so that may not quite be enough for friendship. But you mentioned both Mark Hayes and Matt Bianco as big influences. Talk a little bit about them. What did you gain from Mark and from Matt?
Sure. So yeah, Mark and I met when his first book came out for Classical Conversations. He published a book called Analogies for All of Us, and we invited him and his lovely wife Jamie up to speak about his book here in New England, and connected right away. He was a real influence on me, pointing me toward the Circe apprenticeship as good next steps in learning and growing. And he and I get to connect every year or two in person, at least, if not more often, as well as keeping up through the internet. And he's a good friend. He held my position before I did with Classical Conversations. So valuable work that he did that laid a solid foundation for what we're currently doing. And Matthew Bianco was my head mentor for the Circe apprenticeship. A very, very big influence on me and how I view not only education, but sort of the philosophical world, and appreciate his friendship and an ongoing mentorship. Lovely thing about the Circe apprenticeship model is it doesn't end. When you graduate out, you continue to develop that friendship and relationship over time.
Oh, it's beautiful. I got to hang out with Matt a little bit last Friday night. He was in town to help us at Thales College with a little bit of Supra training, and then leading a Supra for a group of teachers. And every time I get together with him, I just enjoy being around him. Matt's really a great guy. One other question I thought of as you were telling us your story, Tim. Have you, since you were originally, your question that seemed to propel a lot of your journey had everything to do with the relationship between parents, children, and schools, and then you've got the legal background. Do you have any thoughts on the most recent Supreme Court case that seemed to really operate at the nexus there? I didn't pull the name up, and so I don't. But hopefully, you made a face. You know which one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, this is the case out of Maryland. It's a thorny issue. I think that Supreme Court case is really a reaction against what's been going on for the last number of decades, where schools have grown and grown in authority over children. We go all the way back to the English common law, which is where our American jurisprudence really comes from. You get back to Lord Blackstone, who wrote sort of this great treatise on the law. And in there, he talks about how schools only have authority over children because parents have delegated that authority to the school. So it's the parents' job to educate and train up their children. And if they so desire to enlist the aid of schools, public or private, they may do so. But the school can't exercise any greater authority than the parent has, because the child is in the care and custody of the parent. The school has no natural authority over children. It's only what's given to the school. I think it's going to make an administrative headache for schools. I think there's probably a better way to do things, but the court can't make law. It only interprets law. And so it had to thread the needle in creating a limited remedy for a very large and messy problem. It's going to result in more litigation, as Supreme Court cases often do.
Well, that was I looked up the title as you were describing that. That was Mahmoud versus Taylor. And if I understand the story correctly, the real question of the case was whether or not parents could, or whether or not schools could require children to be in the classroom during LGBTQ planned lessons and units. And a group of parents sued and said, no, we, on the grounds of religious liberty, we want to be able to opt out. And so the resulting ruling, if I remember correctly, was that schools do have to create an opt-out situation, and which I'm sure you're right, it does create an administrative headache. It creates a planning headache. Personally, I hope it results in teachers deciding this is way too much fuss, so I'm just not going to do that unit. That would be a great consequence. But I know that's not what we were planning to talk about, but it definitely brings together all those questions of philosophy and education and children. We never quite get away from those. So with that, let's get into a bit of a different question. Tim, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit on philosophy. What is philosophy? What's it for? And maybe if you want to go there, how is the classical education view of philosophy different than what a philosophy major might study at, say, UNC Chapel Hill, or in your neck of the woods, Harvard University?
I mean, at its root, philosophy is simply the love of wisdom, right? That's what its name means, translated literally. And one of the things I try to point out in this book is that the particular kind of love, as many probably of your listeners are very well aware from their church or other contexts, there are different words for love in Greek. The one that we talk about in church most often is agape love. But C.S. Lewis unpacks the kinds of love really well in his book, The Four Loves. I would commend that to anyone who's interested in learning more on that topic. But philosophy, that philo love is the love of the brethren. Brotherly love is Philadelphia. Don't use Philadelphia as a good example of brotherly love today, but it's also kind of this friendship love, right? So I really wanted students to begin to have a friendly relationship with philosophy, with particularly that wisdom piece. The strict full-blown study of philosophy, like you pointed out, might be studied at a university level. Certainly not very appropriate for younger students. They're not ready yet, because wisdom is something that's just growing in them. They're just starting to get a handle on what does it mean to be wise in sort of everyday living situations. The bigger questions of what is justice, what is love, those are big and hard questions that they're not really quite ready to wrestle with. But we can give them things that begin to prepare them to wrestle with those ideas when they encounter them. And also to see that philosophy influences everything. Everybody has a philosophy. Everybody is engaged with philosophy at some level or another, whether they intentionally do it or not. And so this book, Reasoning Together Philosophy, is meant to lay a bit of a foundation so that students see that the things that are around them in the world, these ideas, the things that they're being fed from Hollywood or from college professors at times, or from politicians, they all come with a backstory. None of them is new. There's no new philosophies. There's only old philosophies that have been repackaged and talked about in new ways. So this book, it's a primer on philosophy more than it is an actual philosophy book. It's an introduction, a gentle introduction to philosophy.
I think that's a helpful way to think about it. I taught an 11th grade philosophy class for a couple of years at Thales Academy, Rollsville, and I talked to a couple of philosophy professor friends, and they did draw a distinction that I've come to appreciate a lot more. I wasn't really doing philosophy with my 11th graders. It was much more a history of thought with philosophy as our source text kind of approach. And I think there's a lot of value to that, but that kind of value is supremely different than what an actual philosopher does. I now work for, my boss is a philosopher, and when he wrestles with a problem, you can just see him thinking about it in a very particular way that most people simply don't think about problems. And he's actively philosophizing. I consider myself a dabbler in philosophy. I'm just a generalist and a jack of all trades who likes talking about books with people. But I don't think in quite the way that he does, because he's had this different training. Now, I don't think this is universally true, but I'd be curious in your thoughts on this. It struck me as I was flipping through your volume, you actually do believe wisdom exists, and that we can approach wisdom, and possibly never completely in this life, But there is something to befriend, to love in that friendly way that philosophy invites us to. And that's quite different than a couple of my students who've gone on to study philosophy in secular universities. I worry about those students in part because they get excellent training and excellent formation, but without the conviction that that training and formation needs to lead them to wisdom. They become incredibly good sophists. And my usually when I meet them in middle school or high school, I can dance circles around my students intellectually. So it's perfectly fine to like spar and to try out ideas. But I've gone on to meet some of these students who on the other end of a philosophy degree, they can circle me so fast. Like I'm done. I can't really break their arguments intellectually, but their arguments are wrong. They no longer believe that truth, goodness, and beauty exist. They've rejected wisdom, and they don't see wisdom as something that their lives ought to be in pursuit of and then conform to. And so it strikes me as quite a valuable volume, even as a primer, to have a volume of carefully curated readings that do affirm that wisdom is real, that it actually belongs to us as human beings to pursue wisdom and to ask the questions that wisdom invites.
Yeah, that's a great point, Josh. In putting together the volume, um, I was trying to be very careful not to give students only sort of proof texts for what I affirm or what the classical Christian world affirms, but to really cast a wider net. There are plenty of philosophers in this book that are uh, adamantly and ardently opposed to the things that we would stand for. But I began it with two writings from the scriptures. So encountering Solomon in the Proverbs and Paul in First Corinthians, both affirming that there is a thing called wisdom, and that it's important to distinguish both wisdom from foolishness and also godly wisdom from worldly wisdom, which is an invitation, hopefully, to students to continue on beyond philosophy and to begin to consider theology in its proper time and scope. But but even here, wisdom is not something that you generate. As you pointed out, it's something you find. And I think that that's really important, that they should be comfortable digging through what people have argued, what people have said, to evaluate it against both common sense, and by that I mean this sort of classical common sense and not modern street smarts, and against what other trustworthy sources of wisdom have shared with them over time, whether that's their pastor or their parents or their grandparents, or whether it's someone else like these authors in the philosophy book.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. Let's stick with the biblical text for just a moment. Now, I don't know if I've ever heard anyone directly say this, but in most times when I talk to folks who are well read in philosophy, there's a general consensus that philosophy really begins with the Greeks. And of course, you've got the pre-Socratic divide, and then Plato, and that great line from Alfred North Whitehead that all of philosophy is a series of footnotes to Plato. But you don't start there. You go before then. And of course, I've always thought that both the book of Job and the book of Ecclesiastes are supremely philosophical, and they both predate the pre-Socratics by a good 300 to 400 years. So what do you do with kind of the more philosophical text in Scripture?
Yeah, I think both can be true. Philosophy as we think of it, I would agree with Whitehead, that philosophy in this Western cultural tradition began with the Greeks, but that doesn't mean that it's an entirely separate and different thing from what Job or Solomon were both doing. They were writing wisdom texts long before the scriptures, right? And they were not the only ones. The Babylonians and the Egyptians, the Chinese had texts of wisdom, and sometimes great wisdom. But the Socratic dialectic mode of this testing and comparison and looking for harmonizing and distinguishing types from ideas was new and different and so extremely powerful that it did shape all of what came in Western culture after that. I love the way that Dr. Peter Graefe talks about it when he distinguishes Eastern and Western philosophy, or for that matter, a number of other people. He didn't generate this idea. Dr. Graefe is a great explainer and cataloger of a lot of things. But one of the things that he talks about is that the Eastern way of philosophizing is very different from the Western way. And that's really pretty starkly divided beginning with Socrates.
Now, I think there's definitely a difference in method, but I think you just illustrated for us the universality of the philosophical impulse. I mean, there is certainly there's a universal impulse to understand the world, to comprehend our place in it, and to really try and figure out something a little bit more sophisticated than just the experiences that we perceive through the senses. And that's philosophy comes in there, I think, there's a sense in which philosophy is a very human action. It's a very human endeavor. You mentioned Dr. Graefe. I want to go to, I pulled a quote from from his introduction I want to ask you about. Peter Graefe writes that the excerpts in this book are, all caps, are the mainstream, or they were for almost 3,000 years, until our politically correct cancel culture, which we find on the far left and the far right, divided our culture in two and emptied out the common sense middle. What's Graefe getting at? In what way are these voices part of the mainstream? And then what happens when the mainstream is devoid of philosophic insight?
That's a very big question, Josh. And I won't pretend to speak for Dr. Graefe, because he's certainly more than capable of doing so in his own right. And he was great. He was very gracious to review this text and to give it both an encouragement in the broad sense and also the specific encouragement to students. One of the great strengths of the classical education movement is its strong attachment to what has been instead of what merely is. Without those roots, to steal another biblical image, right? We become like the bush without a root system that blows away, or the clouds that or the waves that are blown hither and thither, right? We need those things, and not only we personally, but we culturally, we as a people need to know where have we been, where have we come from. Without that, we don't know where we're going, or more importantly, even why ought we be going in that direction. So there are concerns and valid points raised by people all over the spectrum, left, right, and middle, about what ought we to read and why ought we to read it. But to paste over sort of the moment, over the fact that we have thousands of years worth of collected wisdom, and maybe even more importantly, collected models in how to pursue wisdom, is a great loss. It's a great travesty, and will result in a cultureless people, which I'm afraid we're already walking down that path. When reality TV becomes the deepest, the most important commonality that we have as a people, we've really lost probably just about everything that's worthwhile in culture.
No, I think there's something terrifying about that. I've been in circles where, that really is all we have to talk about, and it's mildly depressing, especially not to take us off into too rough of a tangent, but as bad as reality TV has gotten in recent years. I'm thinking of some of the articles I've read this summer about Love Island and Temptation Island, and that's becoming kind of the crudest parts of modernity have now entered into that sphere. And if that's all we have that binds us together, that's really a damning proclamation of where we are as a culture. I'm going to go back to your line of a cultureless people. I think that's a really interesting phrase, because that word culture goes all the way back to originally the term the cultus, from which we get culture, we get agriculture, we get cultivate. But the ancient Near East, all of those terms develop around the idea of the cult, the way of worshiping a particular object, usually a god or an idol, at the center of the city. The city was organized around what was to be worshipped. And there's a sense in which civilization still to this day reverberates around a culture. But if we are a cultureless people, that really is that's a horrible pronouncement on us, because we don't have anything that binds us all together. And there's a sense in which I think the texts that you gather together in this volume are really highlighting a different way, that we actually could all have a common tradition that does bind us together. And it's one that certainly Christians can look into and see great fullness and great consistency. But I think the same is, to a lesser degree, is true of non-Christians who really dig into the Western tradition and see there actually is something deeply meaningful here that binds me together to other human beings.
Yeah, yes. I mean, philosophy rightly cannot be entirely divorced from theology, right? The Middle Ages, they called philosophy the handmaiden of theology because of that intimate, close relationship between the two. but philosophy is not necessarily religious. It certainly has a lot to do with your worldview, and your worldview will be interpreted very much through your religious convictions, whether that's secular humanist or Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or whatever it is. But there are things that are common to humanity, right? We see those descriptions also in Scripture, where you see Paul talking about the Jews and the Greeks, the barbarians, the Scythians, right? That there's something that's common in them, and certainly that thing in the church is Christ. But in Rome, it wasn't. Right, the cult at the center of Rome is the cult of Vesta, religiously speaking. But I imagine if you walked around and talked a lot with the people of Rome, it was really kind of Rome itself. There was this patriotic ideal, this image of what it means to be Roman and to be willing to live and die for Rome. That was what ultimately tied the Romans together in many ways, not the cult of Vesta per se. I think you see that very much in Virgil's writing, right? As he's sort of creating an origin story for the Roman people to encourage them in this virtuous Roman persona that they should live out. And then sort of the condemnation of that in St. Augustine in the City of God. But yes, there is something that you can say. T.S. Eliot talks about it in his little pamphlet towards the definition of culture, where there are things that can tie a culture together that are lesser than the cult or the religion. He argues that they never last, that they are always lesser things that never have the holding power that religion does. But an aristocracy or a high culture can do that job, at least for a time. A low culture, which is sadly where we've arrived, is the least binding kind, and again lasts and does very little to hold people together as a group.
Oh, well, reasoning together philosophy just might be a move towards restoring a healthier culture. I look at the whole classical education movement as, in one sense, having that as a goal of trying to restore a common culture that we've forsaken over the past century, but we're trying to retrieve it, to recover it, and transmit it to the next generation. But in doing so, we have to acquire it ourselves, and we have to become well versed in so many things. I was just doing a seminar with teachers about what is classical education, and all that's very fresh in my mind. Is like it's something of an impossible task that we're trying to do. But if the text that you have in this book used to be part of the mainstream, if Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy was as well known as, I don't know, U2 or Joshua Tree, the Joshua Tree album, that's a different world. I have trouble imagining a world where so many people know Boethius and Plato and Aristotle to the same extent that in my childhood, we knew NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys. Like,
Yeah, we've lost a lot. I mean, you read the writings of the men of the Enlightenment, where arguably things went terribly wrong in a lot of ways, and yet there was so much that was good. Um, and they would drop allusions thickly in their writing. I mean, just everywhere, a profusion of references to the great writers and thinkers who had gone before them. They didn't have to explain them because they knew that their audience would pick up those allusions and not require a full explanation. And sort of as time has gone on and we've lost those things, we end up having to spend so much of our time in our writing and reading grasping at or trying to explain ourselves from that historical context that we aren't ever able half the time to get to the actual thing that we needed to say. We're so busy laying a foundation instead of rising above the ground level to say something more.
Well, your textbook goes into, I think, something more of that above ground level. But the way you do that is pretty straightforward. I want to read another quote. This one's from page 13. What makes an apple and not an orange? If a tomato is a fruit, and it is, but we treat it like a vegetable as we prepare to eat it, does that make it a vegetable? When your pet acts like a human, does it become something more than an animal? I thought these were all really interesting questions and great illustration of the kinds of actual questions that students would ask and be interested in, and that those are the kinds of questions that arise from a good philosophical study. I was recently at a lunch with a group of high school students doing a summer institute here at the college, and the questions they wanted to talk about, you're gonna die. Is water wet? And then secondly, is a hot dog a sandwich? And I thought these were both really dumb questions, but 30 minutes later, we have stewed together metaphysics, ethics, chemistry, biology, a little dash of theology. We kind of brought all knowledge to bear on the vital question of, is water in fact wet? Why does philosophy, what does it say about reality that philosophy invites us to pose these kinds of questions?
Yeah, those are great. They are, in a sense, dumb questions, because in today's era, we expect students to just say yes or no, right? Yeah, it is. Why? Well, because it is, or because I experienced that way, or just shrug it off. I mean, are those deep and profound questions? No, but they invite the kinds of analysis that we ask for other more profound questions. Is evil its own thing? Does it have an ontological existence, or is it merely the absence of good? Right? Is virtue opposed by vice, or is vice merely a lack of virtue? Right? These are timeless questions that follow the same kind of asking and answering process, and that's what we hope for our students, is not that they would come to some amazing answer to these 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 year old questions that haven't been answerable by great men before, but that they practice the art of asking and answering good questions. And it's in a fine tradition, because if you read through the Socratic dialogues, he almost always brings simple examples to illustrate the more complex philosophical question that's really at hand. What's the art of the farmer? What's it good for? Well, it's for raising crops. It's not for making money. It's for raising crops. So is the art of the teacher a career, or is the art of the teacher cultivating students? Right? We have these ways to make these comparisons, to go from lesser to greater, and this philosophical means of pursuing them sadly also has been obscured over time as you start to read. And you'll note that in the book that I didn't include the sort of higher criticism German movement at all, because they started to conceal what are basically simple ideas, simple and yet profound, behind hyper technical terminologies, and they became unreadable and really not understandable by anyone except for a hyper specialist. And that's what our academics, our academies, our universities of today spend so much of their time on, is jumping straight to what is the ents and how do we understand it. And that's not the kind of question that philosophers for most of history have talked about. And our students may get there and engage those ideas someday, and they may not, but they certainly will ask these kinds of questions. Why do we treat horses differently from cows?
Well, the other thing I love about that level of question is that there's really nothing at stake. It's not like I'm asking students to really take a position on abortion or homosexuality or tolerance of wrong religion or anything that's like, because once you elevate to like that kind of question, no matter who you're talking to, like both parties believe there's a right answer. And it's very difficult to navigate those kinds of conversations. But in the classroom and in the class discussion, we can have students from every possible background take a variety of positions on whether or not we change the ontological status of a tomato based on the way we cook with a tomato. Like that's something, and we can practice all of these skills that are really preparatory for drawing the right conclusions and then being able to philosophically defend those conclusions at a later stage in life.
Yeah, that's good. That skill of philosophical thinking is its own skill set. And it is what we want to train. And it is why this book exists. Yes, there's content, and the content is valuable, but that skill and laying some foundation so that they have somewhere to begin, a springboard into other reading, other studying of philosophy or philosophical ideas as they encounter them in literature. It's all valuable.
Well, Tim, talk to us a little bit about the content in here. I know you wrote the introduction to each of the primary source readings throughout here. So tell us a little about what are your favorites? Were there any that you were really like, this has to be in here? Are there any left on the cutting floor that you wish you could have fit in? But I mean, it's already a 400-page hefty tome. Trying to get it all on the camera frame, but it's pretty hefty. So walk us through some of the compiling process and some of your favorite pieces in here.
Sure, it's a terrible chore, terrible task to pick 28 excerpts for that matter. Very few of them are complete works. A few manage to be short enough to be all fit in, but most are excerpts. To pick 28 readings from Plato alone would be a heartache. To make 28 across human history is a nigh impossible task. So yes, left on the cutting floor is the majority of human wisdom. I had some criteria along the way. Certainly, I wanted some fundamentals. Plato's allegory of the cave from his Republic was a no-brainer. How do we begin down this road of wisdom, and why should we do it, and why should we keep doing it when it's really uncomfortable? Most of us love living in the cave. We like our comfortable space with pat answers that we've been given. And when the door starts to crack open and the light creeps in and our eyes hurt, we mostly want to close the door. Sadly, that's not an option, right? As students grow, the door is going to be kicked in if they don't open it themselves. And so that was really important to me to have that in there. I wanted to have voices from sort of across time and space. So we do have our biblical authors at the beginning. The only living author I included was Dr. Anthony Esselin, who I know you have a good relationship with there at Thales College.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
There are a couple of 20th century authors. Dorothy Sayers in her Lost Tools of Learning talk, because of the importance that has been to the modern renewal of the classical tradition, and then a G.K. Chesterton work as well. Not quite 20th century, but his wit and wisdom, making profoundly important points while also sort of skewering bad, faulty logic left and right, I thought was such a great way to encourage those students who need to see it as something that is not sort of old and dusty, but something that's living and exciting, because it is. And in the middle, I have a hefty dose of Enlightenment thinkers. Again, not because I think that they're all right or even necessarily all good, but because you can't understand the modern world, the modern Western world, without having a pretty firm footing in the great split that happened in the Enlightenment, where you have Bacon on one hand saying that if you can't see it, taste it, touch it, test it with your senses, you ought not spend time on it and just assign it to the mysteries of God. And you have Descartes, on the other hand, saying you can't trust your senses. Everything is about rationality, and you have this split in the Western mind, and that's living itself out today around us every day. And I couldn't ignore Rousseau, because Rousseau is the father of the modern Disney movement. Of everything would be just great if it weren't for these darn modern newfangled social contraptions.
I had a friend in college who described Rousseau as almost like drinking a cup of warm milk, and it's always nice. I've read a little bit of Rousseau, and I come back to that analogy. I think Rousseau is honestly more like a cup of warm milk with arsenic mixed in. He reads so plausibly that you don't quite realize that you're nodding along with the complete rejection of the idea of sin. And Rousseau's view of human nature it sounds so good and it sounds so nice but I've never met those people. I've only ever met sinners. And Rousseau assumes that it's possible to just be a good person by personal intention and willpower. Yet he himself lived a terrible life. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hijack the show and just rant against Rousseau. He's just that awful.
I agree. I mean, but again, you can't understand the modern world.
Right.
The romantic ideals that so many hold of the people are just intrinsically good, and if you don't ruin them, then they will live a great and lovely, happy life. And yeah, they ignore the fact that not only is that theologically wrong, it's just demonstrably untrue. People don't.
Now, you paired an interesting idea that I don't know how I've never thought of this until I read it in your introduction, but I was like, oh, that's really intriguing. But I'd never thought about it before. You took Aristotle's kind of virtuous life, the pursuit of eudaimonia, the good life, and then the path to the good life is arete, virtue, excellence. And then you compared that to the blessed life in the Old Testament. I was hearing overtones of Psalm 1, blessed is the man who follows the law of the Lord. He'll be like a tree, and his roots will sink down in water. He will not be like the man who walks in the way of sinners and sits in the seat of scoffers and scorns. I think I'm mostly getting that one right. I'm kind of mangling the order. But so tell us a little about that comparison between the Aristotle's eudaimonia and the Old Testament's blessed life. How do those two relate to each other?
Yeah, to me, the key to understanding that relationship is totally the book of Proverbs, where you have this constant balancing of truths that seem contradictory to one another. And Aristotle's, so that golden mean of Aristotle, right? The perfect middle is so true in the book of Proverbs, where you get things like, do not answer a fool according to his folly, followed immediately by answer a fool according to his folly. or instructions to not be the foolish man who stores up his goods all day long and dies with the most toys, right? If your trust is in your stuff, you're going to live an unhappy life. and yet go to the ant, right? And work hard, and there's prospering in hard labor, and that's good for you. It's like, how do these things work together? And again, I think you have this unveiling in Solomon's wisdom literature of the thing that Aristotle is also noticing in real life in his Greek perspective, of saying, there's a middle road. There's a road that walks by faith, to steal the New Testament terminology, but also does not eschew the things of this world, right? It's not Jesus take the wheel in life, right? Hand it all over and wait and see what God does for you. And yet you can't order your steps and trust that your path is going to be the path of your life. I mean, my story earlier about my life is certainly not the path that I had plotted out for myself. So when the Lord took me on, and living that out in faith is the way to balance out. So that good life, it's not the life of the ascetic. God has given us good things in this life to enjoy. Relationships, friendship is one of the themes of this book in chapter 3. We just have to be careful not to stray over into the eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die perspective, right? There's this careful balancing that is so much of wisdom and wise living, and really starts to stray over into that realm of prudence, which is the sister of wisdom in the scriptures.
I found myself using the language of prudence more and more over the last year, as I keep running into situations, particularly in classes where I'm working with teachers, where there's not a black and white answer. Instead, there is the application of prudence to seek the best answer in that situation, given the resources and given the amount of time that you have to make a decision. If we all had infinite time, I'm sure and infinite resources, we could always make the absolute best decision. But again, we don't live in that world. I thought the comparison between those two was just very interesting, because in one way, I look at Proverbs as a book of fatherly advice. I mean, Solomon opens it telling his son, these are the precepts I want you to follow. And we sometimes get in trouble with Proverbs if we take them as direct commands. I think as far as the genre goes, these are wise suggestions that should remind you of folly is out there, but you should always be seeking the way of wisdom. Wisdom is in the streets calling out for any who would listen. And we need to seek wisdom. But in the same way, Aristotle is trying to outline something very similar. I think it's a grace given to the Greeks that they had a philosopher who could say kind of very clearly, these are the good habits that seem, in every case we can look at, they seem to lead to as best of a life as we can really envision. And we ought to seek these things.
Yeah, I mean, Aristotle's list of things that make for the good life are to some degree hit or miss, right? Some of them are really, really good and true. Some of them were probably true in what he could observe, or were true to the best of his knowledge. Of course, he was writing absent the wisdom of God. He was writing the wisdom of men. So what he writes is valuable study, but shouldn't be taken as truth, capital T, truth, right? Good observations and deductions, but not philosophically sound, not necessarily true.
Well, that's a vital rule for anybody reading book 1 of the Politics, because you hit Aristotle's views on women very quickly. I remember my Western Civ students wanted to. We stopped and collectively scratched our heads on the husband, master, ruler, and then wife, slave, subject. Like triple syllogism that Aristotle thought made perfect sense. And but that's one thing. Like we read Aristotle through some of the changes that Christianity has made to Western civilization, and we can't make those equivalencies in quite the same way that he did.
Yes. And part of that is why Aristotle's sort of death grip on the Academy of the Middle Ages was being rejected in Enlightenment. because
Ah,
they were looking at it and saying, yeah, you know what? These things really just don't hold true in real life. And so we have to stop sort of imposing logical reasoning as the arbiter of what is true, and instead begin to look at what is around us. Not all wrong, and yet they kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater.
yeah. Well, now, Tim, who do you imagine reading this book? Is this are you writing this for challenge groups? Is this for individual families at home? Is this for mom or dad to then kind of distill and teach? Is this for a bright middle schooler, a bright high schooler? Who is the ideal user of this book?
Yeah. I hope multiples of those groups. It was written particularly for use in the Challenge 3 program, so high school, junior age students for the most part. I hope that it has a much broader audience, because most of us don't have the time to go out and buy the complete works of Aristotle and Plato, and pick up the Enlightenment thinkers and moderns and try to harmonize them and find themes on our own. There's a lot of things out there. It's a wide world in the realm of philosophy. So again, as an introduction for someone who's not familiar, who doesn't have a mentor in the world of philosophy to sort of guide them into good things to read. I think it's also really important to note, I not only did I not include the German higher critics in this, the many readers will note the conspicuous absence of both Nietzsche and Marx, who have been highly influential in the modern world. They are not there for a good reason, because this was written with a high school student in mind. Those two authors are dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier, you made a sort of analogy of Rousseau to a glass of warm milk. You might equate Marx and Nietzsche to a triple caffeinated Mountain Dew that you could hand to a young person. If they're not prepared to see through the fiery rhetoric and the flourishes, the sort of literary flourishes, those two authors are extremely dangerous for an unprepared young person. And we've seen it in the world around us over and over again. And so I didn't include them here because I think a student who reads this book and really wrestles with what it contains, when they do encounter Nietzsche and Marx, will be better prepared to look at it and say, that sounds a lot like Machiavelli when I read him, or that sounds a lot like the arguments that Hobbes was making or Rousseau was making. And they can see the roots and see some of the gaps that are well concealed in Nietzsche and Marx's writings.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you're absolutely right about the influence of both of those guys. I'm thinking of Nietzsche has been sort of revived in weird, very popular corners of the internet with figures like the Bronze Age pervert and Andrew Tate, are both espousing sort of watered down, popularized visions of Nietzsche. Mm-hmm. And I mean, and both of those become very popular, but they're really antithetical to a healthy vision of the self and of civilization. Yeah. And Marx, of course, has all of his intellectual descendants in critical theory and postmodernity. I mean, but that that makes me think I'm not the best reader then of your book, because I didn't notice the lack. There's so many voices that you could include. If you got to pick only 28 excerpts, those are two to obviously exclude, especially if you want this to be a piece of creative philosophy, in the sense that I think the voices you've assembled here are all interested in helping students be able to think about the world and appreciate the world as an act of creation, and then be able to receive that and stand upon it. Both Marx and Nietzsche, and I'll throw Freud in as a third person of the masters of suspicion, they're all destructive philosophers in the sense that they claim to Nietzsche was famously called the philosopher of the hammer, because he's going to take a hammer to all of your false myths that you believe. which is great if you actually believe lies, except that Nietzsche will come through and destroy them all and leave you with just a pile of rubble. And he removes your ability to construct any true ideas afterwards, which I think especially for high schoolers and maybe particularly high school boys, they're so sarcastic. They lean towards the jaded already. That handing them Nietzsche is I like your analogy of a triple shot Mountain Dew. Like it's dangerous, and it's also one that the right teacher, I think, can make great use of those texts in contrast. But you're looking at a wide-ranging program with a variety of preparation in teachers, and then also the ability, like this presumably will be used by homeschooling families, maybe even outside the CC world.
Yeah. Putting something dangerous into their hands was not the goal. I mean, no. There are dangerous ideas in here, don't get me wrong. I mean, Machiavelli is in there. But it's not dangerous in the same way. There's not. Machiavelli's ideas have been so rethought and repackaged over time that they're almost unrecognizable, and yet they're still very prevalent. But Marx and Nietzsche are so still modern, still in the age of the spirit of the age that we live in, that they resonate in ways with other things that students are experiencing all the time, that they don't need to hear those voices because they already hear them around them.
Oh, and I don't know if you would agree with this or not, but I don't think every textbook is obligated to represent every possible idea. I mean, I think you inherently have to limit what you're going to do based on the usually I hear publishers talk about like, well, we only publish books of a certain size. So like already you've got an inherent limitation. So I'm glad you made that kind of choice. I want to ask you about a different feature of the book, and I'm going to attempt to hold this up for illustration's sake. One of the unexpected parts of this book was the beautiful woodcut illustrations throughout here. That's just the frontispiece to the introduction. That's Philosophy, a woodcut by Albrecht Dürer in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And there are, 20, 30 such woodcut illustrations. There's also drawings of every major philosopher that is represented in here. All of those pieces are very costly for a publisher. I'm sure the Classical Conversations people, somebody had to have run a cost analysis and be like, do you really want these? We could make this book that much cheaper if we didn't have them. So make your case for why you included these elements of beauty in a philosophy textbook.
So I'm firmly committed to the position that truth, goodness, and beauty are not segregatable. That they are not in any way to be sacrilegious here, in a sense, like they reflect the Trinity. They are not the Trinity, to be clear, right? I'm not Platonic in that sense, right? The good is not God. God is good. Truth,
Careful.
goodness, and beauty.
Alec Bianco hears you say that. He just may have words for you about why you're wrong, and you need to become a full-blown Platonist.
Yeah. He and I don't agree on everything, see everything eye to eye, but truth, goodness, and beauty are a triumvirate, three aspects of one thing in a sense. And so I'm very committed to the fact that if we're asking students to engage with something and we're telling them that it is true and should be good, to denude it of beauty takes away a part of the whole that actually diminishes the ability to engage with both the truth and the goodness. You want to get me on my soapbox, we could talk about the construction of school buildings and why cinder block and those awful fluorescent lights in the ceilings and windows that don't open are all terrible ideas. You tell them that beauty is important, and then you surround them with ugliness and utilitarianism. What do you expect is going to happen? So the woodcuts are part of that. We very carefully designed this book You'll note inside that it has very wide margins
Mhm.
and some gracious letting on the words, so that it is not, though the words themselves are challenging, the technical aspect of reading the book should not be. We want to remove as many of the impediments to good reading as we can. Give them plenty of room to write in it. We hope that they do. Readers should engage with the text and annotate it heavily, make it your own, engage, ask the questions, argue with the author. So it's a good book in that way, right? Good in the utility sense that it's useful to the reader. And it's hardbound, which is also something that's not an inexpensive option. But we want it to reflect the fact that the words inside should be enduring. And so the quality of your textbook should also be enduring. The nature of what we're asking of it should match with the nature of what it is.
Well, it is certainly, it strikes me as the kind of book that if I did take a class that worked through these 28 excerpts and presumably some, if not all, of the introductions, it's a book I would want to hold on to, because this would be one that I would probably remember, oh yeah, there was that line from that one bishop in Constantinople that's somewhere on the left-hand page in that reading. And I'd go flipping back through and I would find his letter of advice to Christians on the reading of pagan literature, or we're like, oh yeah, C.S. Lewis said something good about why we should read old books and the way that they are a sea breeze that blows through the mind of modernity. And I'm like, oh yeah, it was at the end of the book. And it's that kind of work. And I'm glad to hear that you and the rest of the CC team were very thoughtful and intentional about how you put this together.
Yeah, thanks. We do hope people will keep it. It's not, I read this for a semester and then I chucked it in the bin in the basement of used curriculum or what, whatever, went out and took it over to the used bookstore and dumped it. I hope that it's a valuable resource for a shelf. I mean, it's all of them are worth revisiting, but it's also easy enough. None of them is so long that it's not difficult to go back and revisit a favorite or something that like you said is reminded to you by something that's happening in your life.
Well, Tim, I just have to tell you, I was slightly disappointed and then reassured, because I was disappointed when I didn't find an afterword from you. I expected to see your concluding thoughts at the end. And no, instead, I was reassured, because this probably was the right call, because he is amazing. You don't close with your words. You close with Anthony Esselin's words. And as you alluded to earlier, I have the joy of being on faculty with Tony. He's our distinguished professor of humanities here at Thales College. And the few times I've gotten to sit in on his classes have just been absolutely stupendous. So I want to read a little bit from his conclusion, just ask you for your thoughts on whether or not you think the world he's describing is in fact possible. But for that question to make sense, our readers need to hear this. This comes from Esselin's book, Out of the Ashes. It's from a section subtitled A Good Land. And Tony is speculating about the future, and he imagines a world that he says, I see in my mind's eye, scattered everywhere across the land, havens of sanity and health, of reverence and wisdom, of good work and cheerful play, of marriages according to nature and nature's God, rich with children and knowing things, the ordinary things, which will strike the newly awakened as wonders from another world altogether. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I see schools filled with good books and ordinary teachers who know the things they are supposed to teach and who also love good books. I see people working with their hands again to make things of beauty, sewing a dress, planing a door, laying a stone wall, painting a postcard. I see people coming together to do ancient and human things, to sing, to dance, to play, to worship God. I see children playing. Some of them are young and race around without a care in the world. They play baseball, jump rope, climb trees, go fishing, play cards, pick berries, ride bicycles, yell at each other, yell for each other. And while they're doing these things, they have no notion of the open sewer that washes over the banks in places where other children live, infesting those lives with filth and corruption. They know none of the evil things that we place before the eyes of children now. They are growing in wisdom and stature, Because they are outdoors so much, their arms and faces are tanned. The muscles start out in their wrists and knees and neck, and they are altogether ready for sleep when night falls. I see other children, the elderly people who sit and watch their grandchildren playing. They have slipped most of the heavy cares of life and now enjoy a kind of frolic old age with contented hearts and glittering eyes. They do not take themselves very seriously. I see a church full of sinners who know they are sinners. So, although the service is full of ceremony, the people do not stand on it. They take their worship seriously, but not themselves. And their worship is in any case filled with solemn play. They pray to the God who made them and redeemed them. They enjoy the virtue that brings man nearest to the freedom of God, gratitude. They know that the sweetest things in life are given and received, not earned and paid for. That is why they sing, for singing is what the lover does. So I want to ask Tony's question in the next paragraph. Is it an idol? Is it a fantasy world that we could never actually inhabit? What are your thoughts?
The soul of me wants to say, I certainly hope not. I hope that is no fantasy, but a reality. His words are so redolent of other ideas, some of them in this book and some from other places. They remind me of some of the contemplations of Wendell Berry. It's sort of the post-apocalyptic view, right? I mean, you have these movies of these Mad Max universes or Water World, right, where man has gone to barbarism and tribalism, and his Tony's view there is the opposite of that. It's these islands of sanity amongst the insanity of the modern cultureless era. I hope it's not. I hope it's not impossible. It's a bit utopian, but something that we should all strive toward, that I think all of our souls yearn for, even if we don't quite know how to get from here to there. So finding those people who have a similar harmonious view and building what you can. You already referenced sort of that rebuilding the ruins. That line is from Milton of education. He talks about restoring the ruins that our first father left for us, right? Adam and Eve. The brokenness. I don't know that this life will ever recover what was lost with Adam and Eve, but we should make it our mission to seek after all of it that we can, while we can.
Wow. I think the classical communities, whether they're brick and mortar schools or families that gather together for co-op days or challenge communities, I think they have great potential for being these oases of true human endeavor, truly human practices in the midst of a modern world that has really forgotten that this actually is what we're made for. We're not made to be consumers or just cogs in a machine, or for endless social climbing or endless placeless, rootlessness. We're actually made for deep investment in each other. And the kind of life that Tony's describing, it's not that long ago that was normal. And it's I don't think it's impossible for us to recover. I hear a lot of Ray Bradbury in that too. Some of his, I think it was Greentown was the name of the series that that turn of the 20th century. Willa Cather does some of this too, like in the play Our Town. Was just at the time, that play is beloved today because it captures a sense that's just gone from the typical American community. But in her own day, Our Town was thought to be blasé. Like, why would you need to write a play about this? We all know what this is. And yet we've lost something. I think I just thought it was very interesting that you close with that selection from Tony. That like it gives sort of an end note to this whole book that says all of philosophy is about gaining wisdom and then living wisely. And that endeavor is in fact possible.
Yeah. And to get back to your point earlier, Josh, about your students who've gone on to become excellent sophists, the point of wisdom is not to gain ideas or to gain a different perspective on the world for the sake of itself. It's almost John Henry Newman's The Purpose of the University. One of the excerpts from in this book is from that, and he talks about the fact that knowledge is its own end. Knowledge is its own reward when you gain it, but it has to be that Platonic idea of knowledge, that right knowing means right doing. That no knowledge that isn't productive knowledge is actual knowledge at all. It's something else. It's an opinion. And so taking what is gleaned from this book and hoarding it for yourself and just to treasure it in your own mind isn't the goal. It is to go and live in accordance with the truth, the wisdom that's been discovered.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Well, Tim, as we wrap up, we actually have a pretty decent live stream audience today. I was not expecting one. The last several times I've live streamed episodes, I've had barely anybody, but we've had between 20 and 30 listeners and viewers tuning in the whole time. So I know you guys have this summer's New England Consortium coming up very soon, and of course, hopefully that will also be happening again next year. So do make a quick plug for the New England Consortium. What is it? Why should people come to it?
Sure. Yeah. In addition to my hat that I wear for Classical Conversations, that's my full-time job, and I'm blessed with that. I get to run and have founded this consortium with some friends where we're seeking to do some of those things we were just talking about, to reclaim what's been lost and to dig into what's good. We have our conference next weekend. It's Friday afternoon and Saturday up in Middleborough, Massachusetts. Our guest speaker this year is Andrew Pudewa, the inimitable Andrew Pudewa. Looking forward to hearing him. Next year, it will be in Southern New Hampshire, up in Merrimack, New Hampshire, July 10th and 11th. And we'll be talking about purposeful paideia. What is it that we have received that we need to pass on to our children? So it goes right along with this theme that we've been talking about today. We also have an online book club. So if you're interested in joining that, you can find that through Kepler's platform. This year, we'll be reading through and discussing Plato's Republic together on Tuesday nights. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out.
Fabulous. And so those dates for that's this coming weekend for
this year's is this weekend.
All right. So if anybody wants to make a last minute registration, July 18 and 19 for 2025, but then you said July 10 and 11 for
2026, and registration for that opens next week. So
you
can get in early. We do have limited seating, so if you're interested, jump on it early.
I dream too big for our Southeastern Consortium this year, and we're great on Saturday. We've got a school campus we're using for Saturday, but we have to limit our Friday night in person to 75. And I kind of like being able to say limited seating and in person. So get your ticket now. Like there's something about that gets people to register. Hopefully.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's nice to know that it's those who really want it that are coming for it. So we appreciate that.
That's right. I'll be sure to we'll drop this episode sometime in our fall season coming up. But I'll put links to all of y'all's pages and particularly registration for 2026 in the notes for this episode. Tim, what's next in your writing pipeline? Do you have other projects you've got in the works?
Yep. So falling into place this spring, coming up April 2026, is a book I've written called Reasoning Together, Words in the Word. So it follows on in the same series of books.
Nice.
And it's basically how to take all these kind of reading and learning skills that students have practiced through their classical education and turn their attention to the Bible. So many of our students, sadly, their exposure to the Bible is maybe sort of family devotions or church on Sunday, and they think they can't really get into it and understand it for themselves. And the fact of the matter is that it was written to be read and understood. It has great mysteries in it, so no guarantees that you can understand everything in the Bible. Good luck with that. Just like philosophy, it's too big for our little minds. But it's a help to students to sort of remind them and prompt them to think bigger than just essays or outlines.
I love that. discovered several years ago that my preconceptions about teaching at a classical school in the Bible Belt were woefully wrong. I don't know if you find this in the classical conversations world, but in the Thales Academy world, the majority of my students did not come from a huge. They basically didn't know the Bible really at all. And so I would initially kind of just assume, oh, we're in North Carolina. It's the Bible Belt. Like everybody grew up going to vacation Bible school, right? And the first school I was at, the answer was just no. The second school I was at, the answer was like, well, no. Also, my family's from India. My family's from Syria. And we started that was a more multicultural campus. But I think we're in a massive, one massive problem is just biblical illiteracy. And so any resources that people can use to help get students to know the basic stories, tropes, patterns, motifs, themes, genres of scripture, I think are a huge win. So I'm glad to hear that's the next book you've got going on. And it's a series. Who doesn't love a good series?
Yeah, it's our reasoning series. So it starts with Marquez's book, the Analogies book, and runs through logic and aesthetics and all the way up into philosophy, and then Bible, which is again an introduction. Like this book that we've been talking about today is an introduction to philosophy. That book is more of an introduction to the world of reading the Bible. It is not a philosophy or a theology text. Mm-hmm. It's farther from a theology text than this book is. No. An actual exercise in philosophy.
Tim, where can people find and follow you online?
So I don't have a personal writer's presence on the internet, but certainly classicalconversations.com is where you can find our CC books and communities, and then the New England Consortium. You can find some of our materials there. And then I publish occasionally with Circe's blog or Kepler's blog. So search me up if you want to find me someplace there.
Fabulous. Well, Tim, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Josh. This was a lot of fun.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you, listeners and viewers, for joining us here today on The Optimistic Curmudgeon. I'm your host, Josh Herring. My guest today has been Timothy Knotts. The book is Reasoning Together Philosophy, out now with Classical Conversations. You've been listening to another episode of The Optimistic Curmudgeon. If you enjoyed this episode, like it and share it with your network. Help others think great ideas. You can find the show on all the platforms, but primarily on X as @TheOptimisticC3, on Facebook and LinkedIn under my name, Josh Herring, and on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to subscribe to get the next conversation.